At the bachelorette party before the wedding, Jill Parkman commits an ill-considered act that ruins her relationship with successful businessman Richard Black. Years later, they meet again. Karma has put everything in its place. A group of 12 of Jill Parkman's closest friends sat on either side of her at a long, elegant table. A soft, diffused spotlight gently illuminated Jill, the guest of honor, positioned at the head of the table. The friends gathered to celebrate Jill's upcoming wedding in a private room at a well-known Boston venue. Despite its casual appearance, the location catered to upscale gatherings and was recognized for its lively entertainment. The music played loudly, the lights were low, and 2 professional dancers performed energetically atop the long table to entertain the guests. As the evening unfolded, one of the dancers seemed especially attentive to Jill, the bride-to-be. She couldn't help but notice his engaging smile and graceful moves. Throughout the evening, he continued to entertain the group, creating a fun and celebratory atmosphere. At one point, a "last call for alcohol" announcement briefly paused the music, but the group, already in high spirits, was reluctant to end the festivities. The dancers resumed their performance shortly after, while waitstaff continued to take orders, ensuring everyone was well cared for. Jill's attention occasionally wandered as she pondered the exciting days leading up to her wedding. The night was filled with laughter, dancing, and shared memories. As the final song concluded, the room filled with applause. Jill noticed a woman near the exit, whom she had earlier mistaken for a staff member, leaving quietly. Jill Parkman was known for her grace and beauty, capturing admiration wherever she went. After finishing high school in Switzerland, she attended a prestigious women's college in Boston, where she formed close friendships with accomplished and inspiring classmates. Despite the competition, Jill's warm personality and charm made her a favorite among her peers. Her father, a successful real estate developer, had built a strong legacy, and Jill worked as part of his organization after earning her MBA. For the past 2 years, she and her fiancé, Richard Black, had enjoyed a beautiful life together in their apartment overlooking Boston Commons. After exchanging several goodnight hugs, 4 of the 12 women entered the bridesmaid's car once a valet had brought it to them. The designated driver gave a tip, and then she, along with another relatively sober friend from the wedding party, struggled to get the 2 nearly unconscious ladies into the car. Jill lay sprawled in the back seat, sobbing uncontrollably in her inebriated state. The only repeated phrase was the guest of honor's plaintive question, "Why did I do that?" as her cries grew louder while the car sped through Boston's empty streets in the early morning hours. The mostly sober friend in the back kept asking, "Do what, Jill?" "We're all friends here, and you can tell us anything." By the time the driver had escorted the first intoxicated lady to her apartment and helped her into bed, Jill's crying had softened to a steady moan. The driver then had to repeat the process at Jill's apartment, where the fiancé had completely passed out from drinking. In the visitor parking area of the upscale apartment building, Barbara, the bridesmaid and designated driver, was gently slapping Jill in the back seat to wake her up. Once Jill was conscious, Barbara asked, "Should I wake Richard and ask him to help you upstairs and get you into bed?" After a brief silence, Jill finally blew her nose and responded, "Richard is in Manhattan meeting with the general manager of 5 stores there. That's the only reason I drank so much tonight. I'm so ashamed of myself." "Why, Jill? I was sitting next to you and only saw you having fun, except you kept ordering more drinks when you should have stopped." Now clearer, Jill replied, "I'm glad you saw me having a good time because I don't remember it." "Well, Barb, that dancer who spent most of the evening in front of me really got to me. I could fall for him, and I'm sure he felt the same about me, beyond just my being a beautiful woman and him being a strier. Am I crazy?" Barbara laughed and said, "No. I thought he was incredibly handsome myself, but having a crush on a dancer isn't typical for someone like you who works every day. It was just a fleeting excitement, and we all had fun. Forget about it and focus on your wedding. Think about it this way. We all had some laughs and reconnected with old friends, some we haven't seen since college. Relax and let me help you upstairs. As Barbara guided Jill quietly through the lobby of the upscale high-rise, Jill's mind raced with mixed emotions. She thought, if I'd done anything out of line, someone would have told me. Unconsciously, she wiped her mouth with the napkin she had held since leaving the club. Her thoughts continued. Those girls would have noticed right away if anything had happened, so maybe it was all just in my head? Could I have imagined it? Barbara reassured her. Just a few more steps, Jill. Jill said her goodnights to her designated driver and best friend before finally lying down alone in the lavishly furnished bedroom she shared with Richard. She tried to relax and drift off to sleep, but the unsettling images from the night persisted in her mind. At one point she sat up, half-dazed, still wondering if her memory was playing tricks on her. Did it really happen? She asked herself aloud, her mind grasping at fragments of the evening. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding or a trick of the moment. Should I tell Richard? I'm sure he'd understand. It's probably just my imagination running wild with everything going on in our lives right now. Richard Black was reviewing the financial statements of his Manhattan hair salons while the shuttle flight traveled from LaGuardia to Logan. Once the plane landed, he disabled airplane mode on his iPhone and immediately saw a message from the private investigator he had hired to check in on his fiancée's bachelorette party. His initial reaction was a mix of unease and frustration upon reading her note. We need to talk. Waiting for you at ground transportation near baggage claim. BR. As Richard headed toward ground transportation, he thought to himself, Jill has a habit of being overly friendly with others, and I felt the need to ensure everything was as it should be while I was busy in Manhattan. Meanwhile, she was out with her usual crowd, some of whom I don't fully trust. I'm genuinely concerned about our upcoming marriage. I even have second thoughts about setting a date last year. Although she comes from a wealthy family, I earn my own way and don't need her inheritance. Maybe she's finally realized that her life hasn't been moving forward as much as she'd hoped. He spotted a woman waiting at baggage claim, whom Richard vaguely recognized as the investigator he'd hired, and approached her. Without any small talk, she greeted him with a serious expression and said, "Let's get straight to it, Mr. Black." She then activated her phone and showed him a brief video of the bachelorette party, depicting his fiancée mingling with the entertainment. After the clip ended, she added, I arrived at Adonis's heaven around midnight and made sure to blend in. I observed from a distance without drawing attention, and no one seemed to notice me in the main club area. The staff assumed I was part of the team helping manage the large crowd that night. After regaining his voice, the groom-to-be asked, "When was this video taken?" She replied, "When last call sounded and a wild rock song was playing, the two dancers on the table stopped and then finished their routine. I recorded the last 2 minutes of the performance by the dancer who mainly danced in front of Ms. Parkman. She was extremely drunk and would have fallen out of her chair that evening if it hadn't had sturdy sidearms. For 2 hours, several dancers came and went from the private party room. Your lady barely noticed the flow of dancers on the table until this particular one was performing. Then she ignored her friends and focused intently on this very attractive dancer. I saw this happen the first 2 times he danced, and again at the end. The other times, she was chatting with her dozen friends at the large table. I believe she wasn't intimacy interested in the other dancers, but was very much attracted to this specific one," she said, pointing to his picture on the device. She continued, "Later, I saw her friends help her into a car that the valet had brought to the front of the club, and 4 women drove away." Richard took a deep breath and asked, "Thank you." "Do I owe you more money?" She answered, "No." "I've written a refund check for the unused portion of your retainer, and the video clip you saw is attached to an email I sent earlier. It's unfortunate my news isn't better, But we live in the real world, I suppose. Richard and the Seamus boarded the waiting commercial car to South Station, where he would drop her off as she requested. Once there, they went their separate ways. Richard Black had earned a degree in business administration from Boston University. He then borrowed money from his father and flew to the south of France to study facial beauty and fashion hair design under some of the world's most prestigious hairstylists and beauty experts. Black was not only tall, dark, and handsome, but also had a talent for transforming plain-looking models, hired by the Institute for their lack of attractiveness, into stunningly beautiful individuals. After a session in his chair, they looked remarkably beautiful even when Richard was a student. In fact, the hired models often lined up to be his subjects for lessons. After graduating in 2 years, he returned to Boston and opened a shop on Newbury Street. Business was slow at first, and he lost money, but his parents supported him. Following a feature in a local glossy magazine and word-of-mouth referrals, his business began to thrive, and the rest is history. Today, Richard was comfortable, but not wealthy, and aimed to expand his business by opening a commissary supply facility and a 4th trade zone location, totaling 4 or 5 shops in the Tysons Corner, Virginia area. That afternoon, Richard's pain was evident as he sat in the back of a car service after it had left South Station. He thought, "We were supposed to fly to the Caribbean for a gala wedding event on Friday. Her father and mother insisted on this extravagant wedding and covered all the expenses, including transportation and lodging for friends at the resort." He closed his eyes and reflected on his life with Jill Parkman over the past 2+ years. The mysterious Helen of Troy figure was one of Richard's earliest repeat clients at his first salon on Newbury Street. He was initially captivated by her striking appearance, finding that her features allowed him to highlight her beauty. One day she even turned heads and paused traffic on the busy street. However, at the time, Richard viewed her simply as a model through an artist's eyes. Eventually, she invited him out for a drink on a Sunday, his only day off. When Richard entered the bar, he noticed 2 men trying to buy Jill a drink as she waited for him. That day, she wore a Neiman's outfit he recognized, and Richard had styled her hair just the day before. For the first time, he felt an unexpected, almost magnetic attraction to her. He quickly reminded himself, anyone striving for success in this business knows not to date clients. He approached Jill's table with a smile. She greeted him. "Richard, I'm so glad you're here. I couldn't convince these gentlemen I was waiting for someone." Turning to the men, she added, "Excuse us now, gentlemen." The 2 left reluctantly. Richard asked Jill, "If I had been 5 minutes later, would I have missed my chance?" "Not at all. I'll admit, I let them stay because I can't stand being alone in a bar, especially while waiting for a date." One of the men called back, "You look incredible today. I'm actually breaking my rule by even glancing your way." She responded with a playful smile. Richard then added, "Well, I do have plans to grow my business and I can't afford distractions." Jill took a sip of her drink and said, "I understand, and I admire your focus, but that's not what I wanted to talk about." She leaned in, smiling as she continued, "Everyone says a woman should be able to confide in her hairdresser. So here's my question, Richard. Why do you think it's been so hard for me to find a compatible man in my life, even with all these introductions from reputable agencies?" Richard paused briefly, initially hesitant to speak to maintain good customer relations, but eventually remarked, "Honestly, I haven't been able to find a woman myself, so maybe I'm not the right person to ask, or perhaps such a person doesn't exist for either of us." Jill responded, sounding somewhat annoyed, "You seem to know all the secrets of many women who can afford to pay a hefty price for their hair and makeup, so I figured you might have some answers." "Well, Jill, in my experience, most people around us are confused, and those who pretend to have it all together are actually the most uncertain. This is especially true among politicians and media professionals. Even worse, I believe that those who are supposed to guide people like you and me are actually contributing to the problems because these experts can only offer more of the same advice that initially caused their listeners' issues. So, I can't answer your question. There was a moment of silence, and she didn't respond, so he continued. However, I live by the principle: plan my work and work my plan, and Ms. Wonderful will come into my life. Then the schemers who've crossed my path will become distant memories. She replied, I understand. Your strategy is to grow your business, and along the way you and Ms. Wonderful will meet and thrive together while building your lives. Richard agreed. Yes, exactly. So, not wanting to discuss the major personal issue in her life, what exactly do you want to do, Jill? I wish I knew. My father and his brother used to work 18-hour days buying, building, and refurbishing commercial and residential properties. By the time I earned my MBA, the two brothers were successful and comfortable, so it was natural for me to join their company and move into one of their properties, where I now live and manage the complex. I spend my days handling landlord responsibilities, which are important, but they could hire someone to do my job for much less money. The problem is, I don't know what I want to do to give my life meaning. I have some savings since half of my income is discretionary, but not enough to start a new business. At the same time, I have too much money to pursue a challenging job, so it's an open question. However, I definitely want to engage in something, though I just don't know what. Though you've given me some ideas today. Thank you, Richard. Good luck to both of us, Jill, as I search for a successful hairstylist with business skills to manage my shops in the Berkshires. Richard and Jill continued their Sunday meetings for 3 weeks, after which Jill exited Richard's life. She didn't schedule an appointment with the stylist who managed his Newberry shop, and protocol prevented him from contacting her. The lonely hairstylist-turned-businessman even frequented the same hotel bar when he was in town during their usual Sunday meetings. He hoped against hope that she would appear, but the diva never showed up. After another month, Richard gave up on the idea of meeting Jill again. A year had passed since he ended his last unsuccessful visit to the 5-star hotel bar on a Sunday. Richard had arranged for a commercial car driver to take him from the airport to his apartment late at night. He felt drained and irritated, contemplating who might take over his role as zone manager in Saratoga. Upon exiting the car, he noticed a new sign at the entrance of his high-rise building that read, "Welcome to the newest addition by Sunrise Properties." However, with thousands of real estate deals occurring daily, such changes wouldn't immediately impact the tenants, so Richard didn't give it much thought. He unlocked his apartment door and began placing a food order through a delivery service. After completing his order and providing his credit card information, a hand reached around him, took his phone, and said, "Operator, please make that 2 orders instead of 1. She then returned the device to him with a smile. Turning around, Richard found himself looking directly at Jill Parkman. She pressed her finger to his lips and explained, "If you're curious about why and how I'm here, meet your new building manager. My father and uncle's company purchased this building while you were away, and I have every legal right to be here as your new superintendent. I stopped by tonight because 2 days ago, your cleaning service informed me that you were expected back today. I haven't moved into the building yet and took the liberty of showering in your bathroom, which is why I'm wearing your housecoat." Richard was left speechless and sank into his recliner, though he couldn't tear his gaze away from Jill. He felt a mix of immense relief to see her and irritation that she would reappear in his life so unexpectedly after a year-long absence. Finally finding his voice, he remarked, "Anyone styling your hair these days must be really skilled to make you look so beautiful." Jill responded, "Oh, I still visit your shop on Newberry Street, but schedule my appointments under a different name, and Melissa is my stylist." "Ah, I understand. Thanks for your business, Jill. But why are you here in my apartment now?" She laughed brightly and said, "I wanted to tell you that I love you deeply and give seduction another try. I like to believe that you love me too, but that you wouldn't act on it because I'm your customer. So, as far as you're concerned, I no longer occupy your chair at the shop since I'm Melissa's client." Richard replied, "I don't think you'd want to spend time with me, Jill, because I'm a one-woman-at-a-time kind of man, period. People refer to my philosophy as sequential polygamy because I don't share or swap partners." Jill was impressed by his concise and perfectly timed reply, fully grasping the incredibly intricate sentence he had just delivered. She responded, "Richard, seriously, I never stopped loving you. Over the past year, I've immersed myself in every facet of Sunrise Properties operations, even representing the company in court for the first time in my career. I work diligently and stay focused when I'm not thinking about you. Additionally, I've been saving money thanks to your influence, and I plan to start my own business independently eventually. Another reason I put in all that effort is that I hope you still love me as I begin to reclaim my life. I've nearly figured out what I want to do with my life, and you are a part of it." Richard was taken aback by her complete change in demeanor. Just then the food arrived, and they sat down for a late dinner, continuing their conversation about the past year. Richard mentioned, "Business is going well, and I anticipate my first profitable quarter operating in Saratoga will be next quarter." He tried to focus on eating because he desperately wanted to hold Jill. His male hormones were surging, and he knew she was unclothed beneath his robe. Jill added, "Sunrise Properties is expanding, and I need a building superintendent for the 48-unit property I'm still managing, even as I commute between both buildings now. More importantly, I need you to hold me at night so I don't wake up screaming from loneliness anymore." He replied, "Hold that thought while I take a shower and brush my teeth, okay?" When Richard returned from the shower wearing only his briefs, Jill stood before him, now neck-deep. He was unsteady on his feet, grabbing a lamppost for support. He smiled and said, "I always thought you were a number 10 under your designer clothes, but God, you're extraordinary." Their combination of makeup and their first-time intimacy encounter left both of them physically exhausted. They had rolled and turned multiple times on the thick carpeted floor, and were both hesitant to move even later when nature called. Jill looked at him and said, "I don't know how I'll manage to work tomorrow with my arms still around you. Thank you, Richard, for coming into my life." Over the next year, life was both overwhelming and exhilarating for the couple. At Richard's invitation, Jill chose to share his apartment. The next change occurred on their first anniversary of living together. Jill asked, "Can we get married, Richard? I want to have a child." He was somewhat surprised and thought, even though she's made some progress in her career, she's still mostly struggling. Richard responded, "Having a child would bring joy to our lives, but we wouldn't be merging our finances because I don't have a fortune, only a lot of debt. Did your parents encourage you to bring this up?" "Yes. My parents, who are now in their mid-50s, want to have a grandchild. You don't need to have a large inheritance, but you must agree not to try to claim mine or our child's money in the future if you decide to change your mind about us." 2 days after Jill's bachelorette party, the driver parked the car outside Richard Black's building, waiting to catch his attention. "We have arrived, sir," he announced. As Richard entered his quiet apartment, he noticed Jill's belongings scattered around the bedroom. Strange, he thought. I hadn't realized she leaves her things out like this. In the kitchen, a pile of dishes sat in the sink, likely from the previous day. He glanced at an email from a private investigator with a report attached. A thought crossed his mind. I used to keep this place spotless before Jill moved in. It just doesn't feel the same now. Are we really as compatible as I thought? Should I even go through with the wedding? At that moment, Jill burst in through the door and ran toward him, wrapping him in an embrace. "Oh, darling, I wish you had called me when you arrived. I could have come over and tidied up before you got here." He gently pulled away and replied, "Jill, let's go to my desk. We need to talk." They sat down at his desk, where he opened a drawer and handed her his airline ticket for the wedding celebration in St. Kitts. "Your father may be able to get a refund on my ticket since I won't be joining the wedding party." Jill's face fell, and she let out a gasp, sinking to the floor. Richard grabbed a glass of water to help her regain her composure. Through her tears, she asked, "What happened? Why are you saying this?" Richard looked at her, saying, "Jill, I've realized we have too many differences for a successful marriage. I do care deeply for you, and I'll always hold a special place for you in my heart. But we're just different, and I don't believe we're meant to be together." She was calm now, had wiped her tears, and finally asked, "What happens next, Richard?" He responded, "I have a lease on this apartment that lasts another 10 months. You can relocate to any of the available units in this building, and I'll assist you if you'd like. However, after this, we shouldn't continue our relationship." His former fiancée paused to reflect, thinking, "Richard couldn't possibly be aware of my mistake with that strayer. What's going on? Why is he acting this way? Why does he seem different since he left? Should I confess my drunken mistake to him? Would it matter to him?" She then said, "Sweetheart, my poor dad and uncle have invested a lot of money into this trip, which can't be canceled at this late stage. Could you please let them know that you won't be marrying me and explain why you're not joining this Caribbean wedding event? Jill, you understand the reasons much better than I do, and rest assured, I haven't changed except for realizing that marriage would be a mistake for both of us." "Something caused you to change your mind, Richard, even if you're not telling me what it is." "Hold on. If there was something that made me change, you would know exactly what it was. So I suggest you tell your father the complete truth clearly, and let things unfold naturally. In any case, I need to pack an overnight bag and stay at a hotel for a day or two while you gather your things." Richard left the kitchen, leaving Jill curled up on the floor, crying loudly. Harry Parkman was a lean, graying man in his mid-50s. He sat at his desk reviewing the income and expense reports for each of the 8 Sunrise properties. As he frowned over the detailed documents, lines etched themselves onto his cheeks and forehead. He made a quick note to himself, thinking, "I really need a capable manager there because that lazy employee, Gibbons, is exploiting our system by clock-watching until he retires. What am I going to do?" Harry pushed this thought aside when his secretary called out, "Your daughter is coming in to see you." Jill entered the large, elegantly furnished office and placed Richard Black's airline ticket on his desk without a greeting. She began to cry and said, "Richard won't marry me and won't accept your offer to fly to St. Kitts with us. Moreover, he has asked me to move out of his apartment." Her father replied, "Hold on, dear Jill." He pressed the intercom and said, "Find out when my attorney can come see me." Then he turned to his daughter and asked, "What brought this on, sweetheart? Did he suddenly stop loving you? Start from the last time he said goodbye before his trip?" "All right. That morning was intense, and Richard asked the taxi driver to wait while we finished, so he could leave quickly. Then my bachelorette party was that night, starting at 10. She paused tearfully before continuing. There were 2 male dancers entertaining our group of 18 at first, but by the end, there were 12. The dancers performed almost knack-D on the tables in front of us, while the loud, tinny music pounded our ears. We kept ordering drinks at the bar. As usual, Dad, I drank too much. A smile came to Harry's face as he reminisced about his youth and asked, "Did you really get that close with the dancer?" Jill lowered her head onto her father's desk, clearly distressed, and murmured, "More than that, I got closer than I should have when he was right in front of me so that no one else could see." Harry stood abruptly, his expression shifting to shock. "You did what? With a performer paid to entertain?" No wonder someone noticed and told Richard. "No, Dad. The others were focused on the second dancer and couldn't see me. I was reckless and it meant nothing." "Did you tell Richard afterward?" "No, Dad. If I don't talk about it, then it didn't happen. He's supposed to accept me for who I am." "My dear Jill, did they teach you thinking like that at that Swiss boarding school? Your mom and I certainly didn't." He pressed the intercom and said, "Tell my attorney we can skip our meeting." Gently patting her on the head, he added, "Go back to work and handle your relationship with Richard with dignity. He's a remarkable man, but there will be others, darling. Perhaps note the Richard Black situation in your lessons learned book." More than 2 years had passed, and Jill had healed from her heartbreak, to the point where Richard only crossed her mind briefly at night. She still winced at the memory of her embarrassment when friends and family came to the resort, where everyone seemed to be having the time of their lives. While the renowned resort offered a luxurious experience, it also led to some less-than-ideal situations for certain guests. Now Jill tackled each day, often working 18-hour shifts. She had recently purchased her first apartment building as her first step toward establishing her own business. By day, she managed 2 buildings for Sunrise, leaving little time for socializing. Her routine was filled with filing judgments on skips, collecting fees for apartment damages, managing eviction processes, and overseeing staff for routine maintenance. One day, Barbara Hallman, her former bridesmaid, walked into Jill's Sunrise office and greeted her with, "Hey, girlfriend, surprise." Jill jumped up to hug her, and they spent some time catching up. Barbara eventually shared, "I just received a cash settlement from my second ex-husband and held an estate sale for my late grandmother's home. With some savings, I've got nearly $1 million to invest, and I'm aiming for at least a 5% return. Any ideas?" "If you're interested in being my silent partner, I have a few plans," Jill replied. "While neither of us has enough to buy land for a new apartment complex, we could still generate income. A 5% return is possible with the right setup, and potentially higher after the first year." Barbara leaned in. "I'm listening." Jill continued, "People are moving into new apartments around the city and need off-site storage. We could purchase 1 or 2 storage facilities and tap into that demand. Dad could support us, and we'd be in on the ground floor." Barbara laughed. "I'm convinced. Where do I sign?" "Assuming you're serious, you'll need to meet Dad's attorney to finalize the partnership terms. I'd like to be the managing partner, so if you're willing to put in the effort, a 5% return is a conservative estimate." The two discussed the market and reviewed available storage facilities for sale. They ultimately agreed on a 52-48 limited partnership, with a small percentage allocated to the attorney as payment and a tiebreaker. They shook hands, and Barbara quipped, "I'm ready to start a new chapter and dive into this business." The two friends, who've known each other since childhood, burst into laughter and felt completely at ease in each other's presence. Playfully, Ms. Parkman raised her hand in a mock religious gesture, forming a cross, and said, "Bless you, my child," adding, "But you definitely wouldn't want to walk a mile in my shoes." "You seem to have it all figured out, Jill. People are lining up just to say good morning to a successful woman like you. Why do you keep saying that?" "Huh. Barb, sometimes I think back fondly on the good times Richard and I shared. With my 18-hour workdays, I don't have much time to meet anyone new." Barb responded, "There are plenty of people out there, even though modern life has changed things a lot, and it seems like finding someone who truly connects is getting harder." "So, do you plan to keep this single life, Jill? What exactly are your future plans?" "Yes, Barb, you're right. It's something I should think about as I nervously approach 30. So if you meet a motivated person, let them know you know someone who'd love to meet him." Barb stood up, walked around the desk, and hugged her best friend tightly, saying, "No way. If such a person exists, I'm not letting you know about him. Oh, I forgot to mention, according to my ex, your Richard is still around and doing well. He's been working tirelessly and now owns 41 shops. Jill, you've become just like him, always working and focused on your goals, sometimes forgetting to enjoy the little things along the way. You've got it all wrong, girlfriend. Mostly what I encounter along the way are difficult people. Richard was the only good thing I noticed, but it didn't work out. But thanks for the compliment about my work, Barb." While Barb and Jill were visiting, Richard Black spent his time at a gentleman's club, a high-end establishment known for its extravagant, exotic dancers. This particular club employed certain women, recognized as prostitutes, who discreetly solicited business from the patrons. After completing his tasks, Richard relaxed by watching the performances, enjoying a drink and some bar snacks, while resisting numerous subtle intimacy advances. He preferred waiting at the club over staying at the airport, and planned to depart early for his 9:30 shuttle flight to Boston. Approximately an hour before he was scheduled to catch an Uber to LaGuardia, a stunningly beautiful older woman approached him, speaking to him in her native French. She completely captured Richard's attention. Responding in his limited French, he said, "Please have a seat, miss, and I'll buy you a drink for the pleasure of our conversation. Have you had dinner?" Taken aback, the woman looked at him and replied, "No, sir. I'm not interested in a romantic encounter, but I'd like to buy a couple of hours of your time and a deli sandwich so I can practice speaking French. Are you interested?" They agreed on a price and headed to a nearby deli. As they left, their departure drew the envy of Monique's colleagues, who marveled that the aging, a girl of easy virtue, had secured a client early in the evening. When their sandwiches arrived, Monique asked in French, "What shall we discuss?" Richard replied, "Let's talk about life, but maybe go back to before you moved here." She began, "It's a common story. There was a man I loved in my small hometown near Strasbourg. I worked in retail, but after 2 years he moved on and left me heartbroken. I relocated to Strasbourg and eventually met an American. We fell in love, got married, and I came here as his wife. We had 5 good years together. But over time, things changed. He requested a divorce, and although it was difficult, I agreed. He still provides me with financial support, but I've been on my own ever since." Richard said, I know how that feels. I've only been in love once, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. I'm still attached in a way, even though we went our separate ways. Why aren't you two together then?" After finishing his sandwich, Richard shared the story while she listened intently. He explained, "Our differences became too much over time. I was focused on my career and wanted to be self-sufficient, while she preferred a different lifestyle. In the end, we were just too different." Later, during their ride to LaGuardia, Monique asked, "You spent 2 great years together. How did it come to an end?" She wanted to get married mostly to please her family. I understood her family's values, but I wasn't ready to be caught up in them. I wanted her in my life, but on our terms. We set a wedding date after moving in together, but as it got closer, I realized we were headed in opposite directions. I had a lot of reservations, and ultimately, I called it off. As they neared the airport, Monique asked, "What about the future, Mr. Black?" They exchanged thanks and goodbyes, and he gave her hand a warm squeeze. As he left the car and collected his suitcase, he remarked, "Maybe one day things could change. For now, though, life moves on." Monique waved goodbye, and he gave the driver a tip as they parted ways. A year later, Jill and Barbara, both now 30 years old, were evaluating their second off-site storage purchase, EZ Store, accompanied by its manager. The renovating general contractor was also present, reviewing each item on a punch list to ensure that all previously identified issues in the contractor's work had been addressed. Unexpectedly, they encountered hundreds of small USPS packages neatly stacked and awaiting pickup. Jill turned to her manager and asked, "Black shipping agents? Who are they?" The Easy store manager, now employed by the two women, replied, "They lease 400 square feet in units of 6 by 10 and have a part-time employee who briefly comes in to stock and ship beauty products." After Jill signed off on the general contractor's paperwork, they entered their manager's office. Barbara asked, "Who exactly are black shipping agents?" He brought up a screen and explained, "Richard Black Enterprises. Most of their inventory shipments arrive via DHL International Freight from France, and then they distribute the products to various locations." Jill felt a chill and was left speechless. Barbara bid farewell to their Easy store manager, and the two women headed towards Jill's office. While driving, Barb commented, "Your Richard is quite busy. Not only is he expanding with new shops, but he also has a commissary staffed by just one part-time employee. Talk about low overhead. Despite all his success, I bet he still thinks about you every night." Jill responded, "At least in my dreams. I wonder if Richard would kick me out if I went over to personally thank him for his business." Barb replied, "He might either do that, move his business elsewhere, or throw you on the floor and make love until neither of you could move. Think about it, Jill. His only issue with you was that you were comfortably living off your father's success while he was working hard to grow his business. Yes, you once held a fake job that Mr. Parkman created for you, I know that. But things have changed now. You're a desirable woman in your own right, girlfriend. If it were me, I would either pursue Richard until I was part of his life again, or end up with a restraining order. One or the other. I bet you are exactly the woman he's looking for at this point in his life, and certainly he is the man you desperately need right now." Yes. I'll think about that, girlfriend." Richard Black had spoken with 3 of his 4 zone managers while dining alone in his apartment this early evening, consuming the less-than-appetizing delivered meal. He felt utterly isolated on the planet and decided to turn on the cable TV, watching a few sitcom episodes featuring attractive and enticing women. However, he muted the TV because, in his experience, as the women became more beautiful, the storylines grew increasingly cliché. Growing weary of this, Richard switched to his piano keyboard and repeatedly played simple tunes, the same ones the hairdresser-turned-businessman had played back in junior high. During moments like these, when he felt completely solitary, he always vowed to himself, "Eventually I'll slow down enough to resume piano lessons. I'll have a companion to encourage me, and laughter will fill my home." He ceased playing and sat upright. He reassured himself, once Tyson's Corner, Virginia is up and running smoothly with 4 or 5 stores. Then I'll take a break and... He paused, visualizing Jill Parkman dressed as a high-quality living doll who could stop traffic, a smile spreading across his face because she was wearing a gown he had suggested and was fully made up like a doll. He nearly swooned, remembering Jill's advice. "Richard, you need to stop and smell the roses." Yes, Jill was correct, and enjoying life was his new objective, just as soon as... Then an idea struck him. Black shaved his face with an electric razor and ascended 9 floors with the intention of taking the first step to reconnect with Jill Parkman. He pressed the building superintendent's buzzer, and a recorded message of Jill's voice responded, "My office hours are from 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock. Please come back tomorrow unless you have an emergency to report." He knocked loudly on her door and called out, "Jill, it's Richard Black. I want to report almost an emergency. Can we talk?" He heard the chains unlatch and the door swung open. Jill, not recognizing his voice immediately, asked, "Richard? May I come in?" She responded, "I'm not dressed to entertain you, whom I think about daily, but come on in and relax in my living room while I get somewhat presentable." He noticed she was wearing thick, horn-rimmed glasses and that her hair was disheveled. Yet she looked over her glasses at him and managed a happy smile despite the unusual circumstances. After returning from her bedroom and bathroom, appearing somewhat like the stunning woman he remembered, she simply smiled at him, as if at a loss for words. She took a seat at her desk, which was equipped with 2 monitors and various other gadgets, and focused on Richard standing before her. Richard began, "In a way, Jill, I'm here for business, but I also wanted to see you, so I climbed 9 floors for some cardio exercise and took a chance you'd notice me." There was a moment of silence as Richard suddenly found himself unsure of what to say next. Taking the initiative, she said, "The last time we were in the same room felt like just yesterday. I'm thrilled you visited me. Please do it again, and often." Richard finally said, My neighbor mentioned he signed a lease for a small office space on the 2nd floor in the ongoing Sunrise building project. I'm also searching for a small office and would like to rent one. Would you be willing to show me around?" She leaned back in her chair, disappointed that Richard had come to see her for business. She thought to herself, he could have handled this online. He's eager to see me just as much as I dread seeing him, and he doesn't know how to greet me. Trying to come up with something to say, she continued, "The previous owners didn't find a 2nd-floor retail space profitable for this area, so I convinced Daddy to convert it into office spaces." Since Richard wasn't engaging in the conversation, she added, "Barbara, who was supposed to be my maid of honor, and I are now business partners, and we might set up an administrative support firm there." He interrupted nervously, saying, "I need administrative help. That commissary I mentioned before is up and running, and 2 other companies in the health and beauty sector want me to act as their agent to stock and ship their products. So I really need assistance." Jill relaxed and replied, "Yes, I know." Black Shipping Company rents storage space from Barbara and me. Noticing that her former lover was taken aback, she continued, "Let's take the elevator down to the 2nd floor where the contractor is working on the build-out. You can choose your office space there." He stood up to follow her, admiring her perfect figure, but once inside the elevator, he instinctively held her hand. She squeezed his back, and for the first time the 2 former lovers focused on each other. However, both remained silent, unable to bring themselves to speak. On the 2nd floor, she held his hand tightly and said, "Here's a 300-square-foot unit with 2 rooms, right next to the elevator. The restrooms are just 20 yards down the hall. You'll be happy with the pre-construction price." He finally let go of her hand and managed to say, "Sold." Jill thought, "It's now or never." She suggested, "Now that our business is settled, how about we go out to dinner and talk about us? It's clear that we're comfortable around each other again, even after just a few minutes, even though I look like Witch Hazel." Unexpectedly, the tense hairdresser relaxed. Richard gently placed the back of his hand on her cheek, softly caressed her face, and said, "Thank you, let's do that. Can I come by your apartment office in 30 minutes? "Yes." Richard took a shower, shaved, and applied aftershave. He then selected a stylish pair of slacks and a sweater. Right on time, he pressed her buzzer after taking the elevator this time. She quickly opened the door and remarked, "Please come in. You're 2 years late." After exchanging some greetings, she added, "Come inside, my dear long-lost man, and let me give you a tour." The living room was immaculate, with sparkling wine glasses displayed in a lit china cabinet and a glass enclosure. Jill looked different, radiant, calm, and far from her previously stressed and overworked appearance. After the tour, they simply gazed at each other in silence. Breaking the quiet, Richard said, "Jill, all I want right now is just to hold you close again." She responded by embracing him, and they shared a tender moment, reconnecting after years apart. Later, as they sat together, She confessed, "We can't go out to dinner because I refuse to let you go, Richard. If you were to disappear again for 2 years, it would break me." She ordered 2 curried tuna sandwiches to be delivered, adding, "Now can we finally talk?" "Yes, Jill, about anything you want." She began, "Those 7 days in St. Kitts, which were supposed to celebrate our marriage with family and friends, were the hardest days of my life. I stayed away from everyone I knew there, walking alone by the ocean. On my flight home, I thought, I wouldn't have married you either if life had just been easy for you like mine once was." Richard responded, "That was a tough judgment on yourself. What made you feel that way?" She paused, then held him close, explaining that she had struggled with guilt over a moment of impulsive behavior during her bachelorette party. She had kept it secret for years, feeling it might have contributed to the tension between them. Richard looked at her warmly and said, "I knew about that. A private investigator showed me a photo. But Jill, that's not why I called off the wedding." Stunned, she began to say, You knew, but here you are with me? Why did you stand me up at our wedding and cause all that pain?" He replied, "I had doubts because we were so different. Anyone as privileged as you, with your father's support, was the opposite of me. My goal has always been to build my own future, independently. I've even repaid my parents for every bit of support they offered to help me start my career." After a brief silence, Richard continued, "My opinion of you started to change recently when my manager on Newberry Street told me that you and Barbara, his ex-wife's unfaithful lover, had started a business together and were determined to become independent." Jill laughed, lightly kissed Richard on the lips, and replied, "Honestly, being a driven go-getter has been my natural state since Swiss high school. However, the high fashion and stylish beautiful people from my prestigious alma mater temporarily diverted my attention. So, I have a question for you. Why are you now so sure that the fashionable, controlling Jill inside me won't come back?" Richard responded, "I think sure isn't the right word. Your commitments to business and motherhood after having a child significantly reduce the likelihood that you'll return to the Jill you were in college and when we lived together." She asked, pleasantly surprised, "A baby? I get the feeling that the only reason you agreed to our original marriage plans was because you wanted to father and raise our child. Is that accurate?" He answered, "Yes, even though I knew that if I went through with the planned ceremony, our marriage might end in divorce and infidelity in the future. I don't feel that way anymore because you have changed a lot, and my goal is to make Jill want to be with me exclusively more each day. Ultimately, it's highly unlikely that Jill will revert to being the carefree college Jill." After taking some time to freshen up, the two reheated the previously delivered meal and settled down to eat. "I have an idea," Richard began, continuing. "Let's spend time together again to ensure that our new togetherness can bring us happiness. If that works out, we can sign a prenuptial agreement to keep our assets separate, fly to Mexico to get married, have you get pregnant, and then return home to announce our lives as a trio to our friends and family." She began to cry. "A baby? How did you know that as I've achieved more success in business and life since you declined to marry me, my desire to have your child has only grown?" Richard responded, "Let's be honest. The main reason you wanted to get married before was because your mother wanted a grandchild. This time, the decision will be solely between you and me." In the following weeks, she retained her apartment at Sunrise Properties and her role as manager while quietly spending time with Richard in his own residence. She ate and slept 9 floors below in Richard's apartment once again. Only Barbara was aware that the two lovers had reunited and had promised to keep their relationship hidden. 3 months later, Richard had purchased 3 hair salons in the Tysons Corner area and hired a capable manager, whom he trained to establish them as unmistakable Richard Black Coiffure locations. These shops became famous for their immediate beauty transformations, with clients' enhanced appearances serving as the best advertisement for his business. As the holiday season drew near, Richard, whose presence was a pleasant surprise to everyone, attended the Parkman family's gala dinner with Jill. Unknown to their host, Richard and Jill had secretly married, and Jill was expecting a child following their time in Mexico. The couple arrived at the Parkmans' luxurious annual holiday dinner, surprising all the guests. Over a dozen family members and numerous children were gathered. The newlyweds stood up and Jill announced, "Hello, everyone. I have an announcement." After a brief silence, she continued, "Richard and I are married, and a pregnancy test shows that I'm expecting." Cheers erupted as Mr. and Mrs. Parkman visibly cried with joy.